Welcome to a presentation of the final project of EDT 6050, and my name is Kostecki. This presentation will summarize my instructional action plan. The action plan summarized in this presentation addresses a learner-centered problem of a 4th grade class in Chicago Public Schools. This is a low-performing class, as will be demonstrated through a presentation of some data. It is a class size of 22, which is lower than the average class size in the school. The average class size is 30. The room also has a slightly different racial ethnic composition than the rest of the school. It has a much smaller percentage of the students in the white category, a higher percentage of students in the Hispanic category, a slightly lower percentage of Black students, and a considerably lower percentage of Asian students. The learner-centered problem for this class that stands out immediately once you look at the data is Room 202's low reading achievement. In this chart, the percentage of Room 202 students whose RIT score on the NWEA map for reading was at or above the norm mean RIT is compared to the percentage of 4th grade as a whole and the percentage of all the students in the school who were tested. So in the yellow, you see Room 202, and it shows us that in the fall, only 23.8% of those students were at or above the norm RIT for reading. In the winter, it moved up to 27.3%. These are very low figures compared with 4th grade as a whole at 59% in the fall and 64% in the winter. And compared to the whole school, it's even lower. The school has 67% in the fall and 74% in the winter of the students in the school meeting are basically at the norm or above the norm for reading. Another data source shows us a very similar pattern, that Room 202 has a very low percentage of students meeting or exceeding standards. This chart shows the percentage of students meeting or exceeding standards and the percentage not meeting or exceeding standards on the 2014 ISAT. This compares the school, which has 71% of students meeting or exceeding, to Room 202, which has only 36% meeting or exceeding the standards. It's very clear from the last two slides that Room 202 students are considerably underperforming in reading and could use additional focused attention in reading instruction. The question is, how can the teacher group students to provide that attention, and what areas of reading instruction need the most attention? Room 202 map data from the winter was used to help further refine the student-centered problem. The 22 students whose winter maps test percentiles you can see on the left were then divided into 4 categories based on these scores. A warning level, where there are 2 students, and that's 9% of the class. A below level, where 7 students reside, and that would be 32% of the class. The meets, where there are 10 students, and the exceeds, where there are 3 students. With students subdivided into these 4 achievement category groups, the data was further analyzed to look at growth over time. The chart on the left shows the average fall map RIT scores for each student achievement category and compares that to the winter map RIT scores. And then average growth for each group was calculated. You can see that each group did have growth. In fact, the data points to some promising trends. Students in the below category grew at a greater pace on average than those in the meets category, 10.1 versus 8.9, which potentially means they are catching up. The average growth of almost 9 points in the meets category also demonstrates good growth, so the meets group is not falling behind even though the below group is catching up. Students in the warning category, however, showed very little growth, leading to the conclusion that additional intensive interventions might be needed with those 2 students. Students in the exceeds category grew at the fastest pace, up to 16.3 points on average. So the teacher is still managing to push these exceeding students ahead despite having so many students below standard. To help determine if grouping by the achievement categories suggested from the MAPS data were supported by other data from 2 end-of-unit tests, each from the Harcourt Journeys series, given in October-November of 2014, were also analyzed. Scores for each test were averaged for each group of students. The warning, below, meets, and exceeds groups. The chart suggests that student achievement on classroom assessments actually does correlate with the MAPS achievement categories, since the averages for each assessment fall into the same distribution pattern as the MAPS scores. The data analyzed thus far suggests that targeting the 7 students in the below category may offer the best and most efficient way of bringing the class up to par with the rest of the school. Many of these students are very close to moving into the meets category. However, how should the teacher determine which content to focus on for these students? To answer this, we dug deeper into the winter MAPS data for these 7 students and looked at their scores for the 3 reading strands. The table on the left shows the detailed RIT scores for the 7 students, as well as the average RIT scores for each of the reading strands. The data in the table indicate that informational text is the lowest strand, with an average of 195 compared to the average of 198 for literature and vocabulary and usage. This strand also has the only student that moves into the warning category when looking at the strands. This indicates that the teacher should target her extra attention on instruction related to informational text. And given the increased focus on informational text in the Common Core and on the PARCC exam, this makes additional sense. Additionally, for the class as a whole, as shown on the right, informational text has the lowest average RIT score based on winter MAP data. So for the whole class, informational text is their lowest as well. So it makes sense that the teacher will focus on informational text. So based on an analysis of the data from the classroom as well as from the school, we have determined that the learner-centered problem can be narrowed down to a deficiency in comprehension of informational text, and that the problem of practice can be defined as follows. The teacher in 202 is not consistently and explicitly teaching comprehension strategies for informational text. The solution we suggest is the instructional strategy of read-alouds that model comprehension of informational text and explicitly teach students how to identify and use common text features of informational text that will enhance comprehension. The remainder of this presentation will outline the action plan to address this problem of practice and implement as well as assess the success of this solution. When selecting a solution to implement, it's important to clearly address why the solution is selected and why it is deemed likely that this will impact the problem of practice. In this action plan, the solution chosen is to implement the read-aloud instructional strategy with a focus on text features. So we have searched for some peer-reviewed journal articles that support this choice and suggest a positive impact. One found that by 6th grade, 75% of reading at school is in non-narrative texts, which, by the way, also suggests that this problem, if not addressed in 4th grade, may become worse as students progress through school. The article read found that non-narrative text is also the most difficult for struggling readers for the following reasons: its vocabulary, its text structures, and its unique text features. And they suggest several strategies to address these difficulties, including content area dictation, which is similar to read-alouds and can be incorporated into read-aloud strategy, graphic organizers, as well as directly teaching how to read text features, all of which, again, can be implemented within the read-aloud strategy. Another article we found clearly stated that comprehension of informational text is more cognitively demanding than comprehension of fiction, and that interactive read-alouds as a strategy have the following benefits. Number 1, boosting student comprehension. 2, developing familiarity with the sound of informational text. And 3, increasing student background knowledge in the content areas, which, as most teachers know, is often a problem for struggling readers. Another researcher also recognized the difficulty students have specifically with informational text, and even more particularly with deciding which information is more important. A lot of this difficulty is because of the text structures or text features in informational text, such as headings, tables of contents, maps, captions, and charts. As students are reading, they skip over these things and can't decide where to go on the page. So the author proposes scaffolding instruction to explicitly teach students about these common text features of informational text. Another author we found noted that in 600 hours of classroom observation, only 17% of read aloud time was devoted to informational text. And the author argues that this misses an important opportunity to build students' understanding of the vocabulary and text structures of informational text. And this was especially at younger grades. They're missing that opportunity to give them the skills that they will increasingly need as they move into the upper grades. The author also emphasizes text features, again, such as graphs and diagrams, as a source of information and vocabulary knowledge that really should be the focus of instruction. A final article found that pertained to the problem of practice and the solution of read-alouds pertains to deciding what informational text to use in a read-aloud. The authors argued that selectivity when using a basal reader, which Room 202 does use, selectivity in this is very essential, especially when educating students who struggle with the basics. We all know that Common Core state standards call for complex texts, and in fact more complex than those found in most basal anthologies. Most basal readers also commonly use questioning as an instructional strategy, and only 10% of the time were teachers directed to model and guide the comprehension process as in a read-aloud. The authors conclude that teachers need to supplement their basal reader with nonfiction trade books and other informational texts that can provide background knowledge, just as other authors have said, and that students can connect to the readings they are doing in their basal textbook. To summarize once again, the Room 202 Reading Action Plan has a learner-centered problem of students that are achieving significantly below standards in reading and specifically in comprehending informational text. The problem of practice is that the teacher is not consistently and explicitly teaching comprehension strategies for informational text. And informed by the peer-reviewed journal articles that we read, we decided that the instructional strategy that can solve this problem of practice, or to help solve it, is to use read-alouds as an instructional strategy to teach comprehension of informational text, with a specific focus on teaching students text features. So the first task of the action plan is to create an agenda item in a pre-existing meeting with intermediate reading teachers to find out which other teachers' data suggests that improvement in teaching informational text is their problem of practice, and to then create an informational text read-aloud team. We call it the ITRA team. These meetings with the intermediate reading teachers often focus on data. Teachers are very familiar with their data, so they should be able to quickly scan their data, their MAPS data in particular, and decide if informational text can be their problem of practice as well. This will be done immediately in May. The second task would be to find articles, videos, and/or teacher leaders in the building who are very familiar with read-alouds for informational text, and to schedule a series of 2 to 3 monthly tricks of the trade after-school staff development sessions, which would be focused on this instructional strategy of using read-alouds with informational text and specifically teaching text features. The tricks of the trade is another pre-existing structure at the school where teachers can go to after-school meetings and receive continuing education units that they can apply to their recertification. All ITRA team members would attend these, and they would occur in May, in June, and then again in September. The next step in the action plan would be to find supplemental informational text that will go with the basal and can be used both for this school year and for the next school year. The ITRA team teachers, working then in grade level subgroups, would work together to find informational text to use in the read aloud strategy. This would be done May through September. After that, the read aloud strategy will start to be used, focusing on text features of informational text and modeling comprehension and synthesis of informational text. All the individual teachers would be the ones who would be doing this, and this would happen starting immediately in May through October. Next, teachers would conduct peer observations among the team members on the use of the instructional strategy of the read aloud. All members would peer review each other, starting in October through December and once again in February and March. Finally, continuing use of the read aloud strategy would be the last step of the action plan. This strategy would be refined based on the feedback from the peer observations. And this would happen from December to the end of the school year. When creating an action plan, it is also important to decide in advance how the action plan will be assessed. And these are the short-term data sources that will be used to assess the action plan. First of all, spring map data would serve as a benchmark for next year, and including the map data for this year's second graders. So we would, at the end of the school year or after the spring map data comes in, all the teachers in their data meetings would do some analysis so that we will be ready. We can get a benchmark for the following year. And all of this data will be collated into one spreadsheet so that all teachers can access both their incoming students and the students that they had in previous years. And another short-term data source would be to observe informational text-based discussions in class. Teachers would be responsible for this, observing any changes and taking note of student use of text feature vocabulary, keeping track of this data on a regular basis so that it can be discussed at weekly data meetings. In the medium term, peer observation of the information text-based discussion and read-alouds would be used as an assessment of the action plan. This would happen in October through November. All the team members will be observing each other. And then in a meeting in December, there would be this sharing and interpreting of the data that teachers bring. This would allow teachers to reflect and hopefully see increased use of text feature vocabulary compared to what they saw in their own classes in May and June. Another medium-term data source would be the fall map data, and this would happen in October. We would be looking to compare the fall map data to the previous year's spring map data to see if there is an improvement. Again, because the data has been collected into a spreadsheet that everyone can access, teachers will be able to go back and see go forward and see if the students they had last year show any growth as well. Finally, in the long term, although map data for winter and spring for next year can also be used, the park data will be the long-term data we'd like to see. It's a little uncertain as to what our goal would be and how that data will be presented to us even, since we have not really seen park data results yet. But this is our new annual summative assessment, and so we will be looking to that to see if we see improvement from this year's park data to next year's park data as it pertains to the comprehension of informational text.